I had ruled Velmore for 11 years before I learned her name. That is the truth of it, and I will not dress it otherwise. 11 years of judgments and treaties, and the long governance of a pack that stretched from the high snowfields to the valley roads below, and in all that time, Wren had moved through my hall like something the room had agreed not to see. She was the pack herbalist. She came when wolves were sick and left when they were not. She set her basket on the table and worked in whatever light fell on her and said nothing that was not necessary. The court flowed around her the way water flows around a stone, not unkindly, simply without interest. She was part of the hall's furniture, the way the fire trench was furniture, or the heavy iron chandeliers, or the carved lintel above the eastern arch. I was the same, I will not pretend otherwise. But something had been shifting in me for the better part of 2 years, and I had not had the sense to look at it directly until the night of the solstice feast, when she turned and walked toward the doors, and I said her name before I knew I had spoken. Let me go back to the beginning, let me be precise. She deserves that much and more. Velmore is a highland hold, stone and timber and fire, carved into the mountain's south-facing shoulder so that on clear days you can see the valley spread below like a great calm hand. The pack quarters step down the mountain in terraces, each level connected by covered walkways that let the wolves move without losing warmth in the hard months. The great feasting hall occupies the highest terrace, open on its eastern face to the alpine dark, so that when the wind comes down off the snowfields it pours straight through the hall and sets every torch guttering at once. It is not a soft place. It is not built for softness. The wolves of Velmore are highland wolves, dense-furred, long-limbed, built for altitude and cold, and they keep a court that reflects them. Direct, practical, not given to sentiment. I had come to the rule of Velmore young after my father's death, and I had governed it as I'd been taught, with precision, with fairness, and without weakness. The pack respected me. I was not afraid of difficult decisions. I sat in council for hours at a time and never lost my temper, and I held the pack's borders clean and its wolves fed and its feuds settled. What I had not managed in 11 years was a mate. This was not for lack of trying, precisely. The council had arranged meetings. There had been women of rank, women of strength, women my advisors thought suitable. I had been correct with all of them and wanted none of them, and I had stopped explaining this after the 3rd year because there was nothing to explain. The bond was not there. A man who has felt the mate bond described by his father, by the elders, by the old stories, knows what he is looking for, even if he cannot name it precisely. He knows it by the absence of it, the way a wolf knows north by the compass pull it has always walked by. I walked through those meetings, and the compass did not move. So I stopped holding the meetings, and the council learned not to press me, and the subject became one of those settled silences that accumulate in any long governance. I had, by the 2nd year of that silence, entirely stopped thinking about a mate. This was, I understood later, the precise moment Wren arrived in Velmore. She came from the valley settlements, one of the smaller pack-affiliated villages that supplied Velmore with goods and services, and the occasional wolf who wanted a different life. The valley healer had trained her and then died, and she had come up the mountain road with her basket and her credentials and her very quiet face and asked to serve the hold's pack as herbalist. The steward had approved it. I had not been consulted, which was correct. A herbalist was a household matter, not a governance one. She was given a workroom off the east corridor and a small sleeping chamber above it, and she began. The pack liked her. I heard this in passing, the way I heard most things about household life, in the margins of other conversations, not as information directed at me. Wolves with fever improved under her care. The pups, who were notoriously suspicious of strangers in their hold, accepted her without difficulty. She did not talk too much or too little. She did not ask for things she had not been offered. She showed up when she was needed and did not show up when she was not. These were, by Velmore's accounting, the highest virtues. I registered all of this the way I registered most household information, adequately and then not again. What I did not register, what I could not have named in those early months, was the way my wolf had begun to pay attention. A wolf self is not a separate creature. Any alpha will tell you this. He is you, the deeper you, the part that moves by instinct before the mind catches up. He does not have conversations. He does not leave notes. He simply pulls or he does not pull, and you feel it as a pressure or a restlessness or an inexplicable interest in a particular direction. My wolf for 11 years had been a quiet and cooperative presence, patient, steady, undemanding. He had not pulled toward anyone in all that time. In the second winter of Wren's service at Velmore, he began to pull. I noticed it as a slight restlessness when I was in the east corridor, a sense of something left undone in that direction, an attention that drew itself toward the workroom without my instructing it to. I dismissed it as habit. I had meetings in the east wing sometimes. I knew the corridor. I ignored the pull the way I ignored a dozen minor sensations in a day's governance, and I went about my work. But it persisted. Through that winter and into the following spring, my wolf kept a quiet, patient, entirely unexplained interest in the east corridor, in the workroom. In whatever was in the workroom, I told myself this was nothing. I governed. I held councils. I signed treaties and settled disputes and reviewed the pack's winter losses and planned the spring. And somewhere below all of that, like a note held too long on a low string, my wolf waited. I did not look directly at what he was waiting for. I think now that I was afraid of what I would find. I first truly saw her in the autumn of her second year. Not the first time my eyes had landed on her. She had been in and out of the hall for 2 years. I had a king's automatic awareness of every body in a room, and I had registered her presence the way I registered all of them. But this was different. This was the moment the hall shifted, and something in me shifted with it. There had been a ceremony, a rank conferral, one of the small formal occasions that punctuate a pack's year. The hall was full. Torches burned in the brackets and the fire trench ran its full length, and the pack stood in their configurations of rank and family, everyone in their proper place. I stood at the head of the hall with my advisors at my back. The ceremony was brief and the occasion was pleasant, and afterward the pack settled into the informal gathering that always followed: talk, food, the easy sociability of wolves who are comfortable together. I was moving through the hall, doing what an alpha does at such occasions, acknowledging, exchanging a word here and there, being present without being overbearing, when I passed the far end of the fire trench and saw her. She was treating one of the older wolves, Garrow, who had a persistent stiffness in his shoulder that no amount of rest had corrected. She had a small kit open on the bench beside him, and she was working something into the joint with careful, even pressure, and Garrow was talking about something entirely unrelated, the spring planting, I think. And she was listening with the full attention that I had learned, by then, was one of her fixed qualities. She listened to everyone as though what they were saying mattered. Not performed attention, not the courtier's mimicry of interest, real attention, the kind that costs something. Garrow finished what he was saying. She said something quiet in return, and he laughed, and she did not. Not from sternness, she was not a stern woman. She had a quality of stillness that could be mistaken for sternness by people who looked quickly, but it was not that. It was more like a deep quietness, a sense that she had arranged herself around a very still center. My wolf went absolutely alert. Not the slow, patient pull I had been ignoring for 2 years. Something much sharper, something that stood up inside me and looked. I kept moving. I was not a man who stopped in the middle of a hall and stared. But the image stayed with me, her hands on Garrow's shoulder, the firelight finding the angle of her face, the quality of her listening. And that night in my chamber, my wolf would not settle. I told myself it was because I was tired. I had been tired for weeks, the particular tiredness of long governance with no clear resolution in sight. I told myself I was reading things into a passing moment. I told myself a great many reasonable things, and my wolf sat in the center of all of them and looked at me with great patience and did not move. After that, I was aware of her. Not in any way that would have been visible to anyone else. I did not seek her out. I did not alter my movements to pass through the east corridor more often than I had before, or if I did it rarely enough that no one could have noticed, least of all her. But I was aware of her, the way you become aware of a sound you have been hearing for a long time without registering. Suddenly you cannot stop hearing it. I observed at a king's distance. She was more capable than she was given credit for. This I understood gradually as I paid attention. The pack accepted her without fuss, which was its own acknowledgement, but they did not particularly remark on her. She was useful. She was there. She was thanked for being useful and there, and then the conversation moved to other things. A wolf who had recovered from a bad fever would say, "Wren sorted it out," with the same tone they would use to say the weather cleared, gratitude without ceremony, because the thing had simply been handled. She had become, in 2 years, as much a part of Velmore's functioning as the fire trench or the covered walkways, essential and unnoticed. She also, I observed, never complained about this. I had known enough people in positions of quiet service to recognize the signs of chafing, the small adjustments of tone, the slight edge that comes into the voice of someone who feels they are being overlooked, the way a person begins to tighten around the fact of their own invisibility. Ren showed none of it. She did her work with the same steadiness in her third year that she had in her first. She did not angle for recognition. She did not cultivate relationships with pack members of higher standing. She did not make herself more visible. She simply continued to be exactly what she was, with a completeness that I found increasingly extraordinary. I did not tell her any of this. I passed her in corridors and gave the nod I gave to all household staff, and she gave the respectful inclination she gave to me, and we did not speak beyond the odd necessary word about hall logistics. This went on for months. And then came the Solstice Feast, and everything changed. The Solstice Feast is Velmore's largest occasion, 3 days of gathering, with wolves coming in from the valley holdings and the outlying territories, formal ceremonies on the first day and open feasting on the second and third. The hall is packed. There is music and competition and a great deal of food, and on the second evening a ceremony of remembrance for the pack's dead of the year, which is followed by a celebration of the living. I had presided over this feast 11 times. It was a pleasure each time. I was not a man who disliked his pack's joy, and the solstice brought out a warmth in Velmore that the hard months sometimes buried. This year there were more visitors than usual. Among them was Lord Farron, a Highland alpha from a neighboring territory who was in Velmore for treaty discussions, and who had extended his stay to include the feast. He was a reasonable man in council, straightforward, sharp, not unkind. And at the feast he was sociable in the easy way of wolves accustomed to court. The second evening was well underway. The hall was bright and loud and smelled of pine and roasted meat and the particular cold and warmth of an alpine celebration. I was near the head of the hall with Farron and 2 of my senior council when I became aware, at the edge of my attention, of Ren moving along the far wall. She had been working the feast, not serving, she was not assigned to service, but doing what she always did, moving through a gathered crowd with her eyes open, noting who was favoring an injury, who looked pale beneath the celebration, who needed something they had not thought to ask for. She had a small pouch at her belt and a cup in her hand, and she was entirely at work, even here, even on the feast's most festive night. Farron said something. I responded. I kept the conversation without difficulty. I had been managing such conversations for 11 years, and the part of my attention that was not on Farron tracked her. I saw the moment it happened. One of Farron's attendants, a young lord from the valley, bright-faced and thoughtless, the kind who is careless without malice, made a remark to the man beside him. Not loud, but in a lull in the surrounding conversation it carried. "Is that the little herbalist? She's been circling the hall for an hour. Doesn't she know it's a feast?" A few people in the immediate vicinity heard it. There was a small sound of amusement, not cruel exactly, but easy. The laugh of people who find nothing wrong with what has just been said. Farron glanced in the direction of the remark, then back at me, with the smooth social navigation of a man who had learned to notice other people's reactions before committing to one himself. My own reaction was something I did not immediately understand. It was not rage, not the sharp thing that would have been clear and manageable. It was something quieter and considerably more dangerous. A coldness. A stillness that began in my wolf and spread outward the way cold spreads through stone. I looked at Ren. She had heard it. I was near enough and watching carefully enough to see the small, still moment that passed through her, a slight settling, like a person setting something down that they have been carrying a long time. Not flinching. Not reacting with hurt or anger or the particular brightness that some people put on when they are pretending something has not landed. Just stillness. And then she set her cup on the nearest surface, straightened her posture to something that was not quite the posture of someone who has been dismissed, and turned toward the great doors at the eastern end of the hall. She was leaving. Not stomping out, not making a statement, not offering anyone the dignity of a reaction to observe. She was simply finished, and she was going, and every line of her said that she did not require anyone's acknowledgement of the fact. Something in me broke. I have thought about it often since that precise moment, the compound of things that broke. 2 years of my wolf's patient waiting, and the faint pull in the east corridor, and the image of her hands on Garrow's shoulder, and every passing corridor moment I had filed and not examined. and the sight of a young lord's carelessness landing on someone who had given 3 years of her capable, steady, unnoticed self to my pack without once asking to be seen, all of it collapsed into a single point. And from that point the truth was simply there, clear as the cold air coming off the alpine dark. She was mine, not as possession, not as prize, as destiny, the specific, undeniable thing the elders describe that a man knows when it lands, that cannot be unfelt once it is felt. My wolf rose in me like a tide and said, her. And everything else in me, the governance and the precision and the 11 years of doing things correctly, fell absolutely still and listened. She was almost to the doors. Rend. I said it without deciding to. My voice came out level, not a command, not a plea, simply her name, spoken the way you speak a name you have known a long time, which was strange because I had barely used it, and yet it came out as though I had been saying it for years. She stopped. The hall, or the part of it immediately around us, stopped with her. She did not turn immediately. There was a beat of silence, one full breath, and then she turned, and she looked at me across the distance of the hall, and her expression was exactly what I had learned to expect from her. Careful, composed, a steadiness that held itself together not by effort but by nature. I had forgotten what I was going to say. I had not planned anything beyond her name. "Come back," I said. The hall was not entirely silent. It was too large and too loud for my voice to have carried to every corner. But the people near us, the ones who mattered in that moment, had heard. Farron had heard. My counsel had heard. The young lord who had made the remark was very still. Wren looked at me across the space between us. She was perhaps 30 feet away, near the doors, and she had turned fully and was watching me with that particular attention of hers, the kind that takes the full weight of a thing before responding. I had crossed half the distance between us before I was aware of moving. This was not a thing I did. I was a man who was deliberate in his movements, who did not cross a hall toward someone before thinking through every implication of the action. I had governed a pack for 11 years on precisely that quality, the restraint, the precision, the refusal to move faster than understanding. I crossed the hall toward her before understanding had a chance to object, because my wolf had already decided, and my wolf was not wrong. She watched me come. She did not step forward to meet me, and she did not step back. She held her ground in the way she held everything, without force, without theater, simply by being exactly where she was. I stopped in front of her. The mate mark, the bond mark that runs along the inner wrist of a wolf who has found his mate, dormant until the two are close enough for the bond to register, flared gold on my left wrist. I felt at the moment I was within arm's reach of her. Not a mild warmth or a subtle ache. A clear, bright burn, golden and certain, the mark igniting after years of patient waiting. She looked down at my wrist, then back up at my face. "You can see it," I said. It was not a question. She could see it. Her own mark, the mirror of mine, was warming on her inner wrist. I watched the color of it rise through her skin, faint gold deepening to something bright and undeniable, and her expression did something I had not seen it do before. It fractured just slightly, not breaking. More like the surface of still water when something lands in it. A single disruption moving outward in all directions and then settling again, but changed. "Yes," she said, her voice was low and even. "I can see it." "This is the bond," I said, because she was not pack-born and had come from a valley settlement, and I did not know with certainty whether she had been told. "The mate bond between us." "I know what it is," she said. "Were you going to tell me?" I said, and then stopped, because I realized that I had, in my shock and my sudden overwhelming clarity, asked the wrong question entirely. She had not known. She could not have known before this moment because the bond does not show itself until proximity and recognition align, and she had not been near enough to me with enough of my attention on her for it to register. "No," I said, answering myself. "You couldn't have, I'm sorry." "My lord," she said. "Aldrich," I said, "please." She was quiet for a moment. Around us, the hall had achieved the particular quality of loud room gone still that happens when something is occurring that no one wants to miss. I was aware of it distantly, the way a man is aware of weather when he is already standing in it. "I was going to leave," she said very carefully, "because I was tired." "I know." "Not of the work." She said this with a slight emphasis that told me she wanted to be precise. "I was not tired of the work. I have never been tired of the work." "I know," I said again, and I did know, with a certainty that had nothing to do with anything I had been told and everything to do with 2 years of observation. You were tired of something else. She looked at me for a long moment. Yes. I am sorry, I said, that I was part of that. The fractured quality in her expression shifted again, not defensiveness, not relief, something more complicated than either. The look of a person who has heard something true said out loud and does not quite know what to do with it yet. The bond, she said after a moment. Yes. It doesn't. I want to be clear about this. She said it with a steadiness that I recognized by now as her particular kind of courage. It doesn't obligate me to anything. No, I said, it doesn't. Good, she said, and then after a pause, then I would like to understand it before I decide anything. That is entirely reasonable, I said, and I will tell you everything I know. But first, I turned, because I had become aware that the young lord from Farron's party was still very still in my peripheral vision, and there was a thing that needed to be said in this hall, in this moment, in front of the people who had heard the careless remark and laughed their easy laugh. First, I would like to say something to my pack. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. An alpha's voice in his own hall carries as far as he intends it to. The hall found its quiet. Wren has served Velmore for 3 years, I said. She has healed your wolves and your pups and your elders. She has come when she was needed and asked for nothing she was not owed. She has been the kind of person this pack claims to value, steady, capable, without vanity, without complaint. I paused. She has also been the kind of person this pack has managed to overlook for 3 years. That is on me as much as on anyone here. It ends tonight. The hall was very quiet. She is my fated mate, I said. The bond is between us and it is real, and it has been waiting for this hall to pay attention. I looked at the young lord from Farron's party, and he met my eyes, and then he looked at the floor, which was the correct response. I intend to court her properly with her consent, and to give her every reason to choose Velmore and the position that belongs to her. But I want this said clearly tonight in front of you all. She is not invisible. She was never invisible. We simply were not looking. Silence. And then, from somewhere in the hall, I thought it was Garrow, the old wolf she had treated at the ceremony. Someone began to strike their palm against the table, the pack's gesture of acknowledgement. One voice, then several, then more, until the sound ran through the hall like a wave, and the pack of Velmore was acknowledging together the woman they had agreed not to see. I turned back to Wren. She was watching me with that steady, careful attention, and there was something in her face now that had not been there before the night began. Not happiness, not triumph, but the careful beginning of something she was deciding whether to let herself feel. That was, she said, more than I expected. I have a great deal to make up for, I said. I intend to start now if you'll allow it. She was quiet for the length of several breaths. Then she said, I'll allow it. I will tell you the rest, because she deserves to have the full account given. I did not rush her. I want to be clear about this, because the bond creates in a wolf an urgency that is not always kind to the person on the other side of it, and I had watched what that urgency could do, had seen it in other alphas, the way the bond's pull could shade into pressure, and the way pressure could sour something that should have been good. I was not going to do that to her. She had said she wanted to understand the bond before she decided anything, and she had said it with the specific steadiness of a woman who means exactly what she says, and I respected it. So I began where she asked me to begin, with the truth of what the bond was. We sat in my council chamber that night, after the feast had wound down and the hall had emptied. She had not gone back to her workroom. I had asked if she would stay and talk, and she had considered this for a moment and then said yes. We sat on opposite sides of the council table, which was a strange choice of geometry for what we were discussing, but she chose the seat and I did not override it. She was establishing distance that she felt she needed, and the distance was not a rejection. It was the work of a woman trying to think clearly about something very large, and I understood it. I told her about the bond, the history of it, the way it manifested in Highland wolves, the mark, the pull, the certainty, the way it built over time between two people who allowed it. I told her that it was not compulsion. It had never been designed as compulsion. The old texts, I had read them in the years when I was still looking, were specific on this point. The bond was recognition, not requirement. It showed a man his fated mate. It did not instruct him how to behave toward her. That was his own character, not the bond's work. She listened to all of this with her careful attention. She asked precise questions about whether the mark would fade if the bond was not pursued. It would not. It would simply remain a quiet fact. About whether the bond could be felt by both parties, it could, though the quality of it varied. About what obligations the bond created, none, beyond the recognition of what it was. When I had finished, she was quiet for a long time. "Why didn't you notice before?" she said, not accusing, genuinely curious. "My wolf noticed," I said. "For 2 years he noticed. I told myself it was nothing." "Why?" This was a harder question. I thought about how to answer it honestly. "Because I had stopped looking," I said. "Not for you specifically, for anyone. I had stopped believing the bond existed for me, and so I stopped seeing evidence of it even when it was there." She looked at me steadily. "That's a very honest answer." "I owe you honest answers." "You owe me very little," she said. "We've barely spoken." "I know," I said. "I intend to change that if you will let me." She was quiet again, looking at the marks on our wrists. They had settled from the first bright flare to a steady, warm gold, the bond's resting state, the way the elders had described it. Neither of us had touched the other. The marks had required nothing beyond our proximity. "Tell me about Velmore," she said eventually. "Tell me what it is to live here, the real version, not the formal one." So I did. I told her about the pack's rhythms, the good and the difficult, the cold months and the feuds that came with close quarters, the spring when everyone unbuttoned slightly and the held tensions of winter dispersed, the way Highland wolves were proud and stubborn and occasionally infuriating, and also, when things were hard, capable of a solidarity that no lowland pack I had encountered had matched. I told her about the governance, the parts that gave me satisfaction and the parts that were grinding and thankless. I told her about my father, and what kind of man he had been, and how I had tried to build on what was good in his rule and correct what was not. I talked for a long time, and she listened, and occasionally she asked a question, and the chamber was quiet and warm, and the night moved on around us without our noticing. At some point, she began to talk herself. She told me about the valley settlement she had come from, a small pack-affiliated village, close-knit, not unkind, but limited in what it could offer a woman with her capabilities. She had learned healing from the village elder and had been good at it, and had known for years that there was more she could learn than the village could teach her. She had come to Velmore looking for scope, not recognition. She did not say this with any bitterness. She seemed genuinely to have made her peace with what Velmore had given her and what it had not. But she said it with the precision of a woman who knows exactly what she wants and has been patient about the gap between what she wants and what she has. "What do you want?" I asked her. "Not about the bond, about everything." She considered this carefully. "To do the work properly," she said. "To have access to what I need to do it well, to be taken seriously as a healer, not thanked and then forgotten." "All of those are possible," I said, "here with me." "I know," she said. "That's what I'm deciding." She did not decide that night. She went back to her workroom after the small hours had passed, and I walked with her as far as the east corridor, and we said good night with the particular formality of two people who have just told each other important truths and are not quite sure yet what that means. I did not reach for her. She did not reach for me. But she did pause at the door to the east corridor and look back at me just once, and there was something in her face that had not been there in the 3 years I had known her from a distance, or something I had not had the attention before to see. A warmth, the beginning of one, an opening. I went back to my chamber and sat for a long time without lighting a lamp. My wolf was quieter than he had been in 2 years, not because he was satisfied, but because he had been heard. He had been pointing at something true, and now the truth was out, and all that remained was the work of earning it. I understood in the dark of that chamber that the work was mine to do. She had given me 3 years of her capable self without my noticing. The balance was not even close. I did not know if it could be made even, but I was going to try. The courting went slowly, and I was glad of it. I asked her the next morning if I could bring her tea. She took it without milk. I had learned from watching, and she allowed it. I sat with her in her workroom while she worked, and I did not talk unless she wanted to talk, and I did not take up more space than she had given me. She told me about what she was making, a preparation for the old wolf Garrow's shoulder, an infusion for the pups who had been passing around a chest cold. And I listened with the full attention she had always given to everyone else, and I felt her notice it. I began to attend to things I had not attended to before. The workroom needed better light. I had lamps added. She had been making do with inadequate storage for her preparations. I had shelving built to her specification. I did not make a production of any of it. She would arrive in the morning to find the thing done, and she would look at it, and then at me, and there would be a small shift in her expression that I was learning to read. She came to council once to present her assessment of the pack's health through the cold months and what preparations she thought the hold needed for the coming hard season. I had asked her to come, and she had agreed, and she presented her assessment with the calm precision of someone who had been thinking carefully about her subject for a long time and was glad to finally be asked to say it out loud. My counsel listened. They asked questions. She answered each one with the same steadiness. Afterward, in the corridor outside the council room, she stopped walking and turned to face me. "That was the first time I've been asked," she said. "I know," I said. "It should have happened 2 years ago." She nodded once, accepting this, and walked on, and I walked beside her. The marks on our wrists brightened when we were close and steadied when we were not, and after a few weeks I stopped noticing them with conscious attention because they had become simply part of how I moved through the day, the direction of the bond, the warmth of it when she was near, the quiet fact of it. My wolf was patient. He had been patient for 2 years. He could manage longer. What mattered was that she was deciding, and I was giving her space to decide, and every day something shifted slightly. There were small things. She began to set a second cup on the table in her workroom when she made tea in the mornings, which she had not done before. She started calling me by my name, Aldrich, without the pause she had put before it at first. She told me about the valley, about her childhood in the healer's house, about the elder who had taught her and whom she had loved and who had died too soon. I told her things in return that I had not told anyone, about the loneliness of long governance, about the specific weight of making decisions that no one will second-guess to your face, but everyone talks about behind it, about the strange isolation of being the one everyone looks to. "You're very good at appearing not to need anything," she told me one evening. "So are you," I said. She looked at me steadily. "Yes," she said, "it's a useful skill. It can also be a trap." "I know," I said. "Have you told anyone else any of this?" She meant the governance, the weight of it, the isolation. "No." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "I think I'd like to go on being someone you can tell these things to." It was a careful statement, framed carefully in the way she did everything, offering something without overselling it, making sure I understood exactly what it was she was offering and what it was not. But I understood what it meant. She was deciding. The decision was moving. "I would like that very much," I said. Lord Farron left Velmore 2 weeks after the solstice feast, the treaty signed. The visit concluded with the goodwill that had been its purpose. Before he left, he found me in the East Corridor, not accidentally. Farron was a man who did things on purpose, and he said, without preamble, "She's remarkable." "Yes," I said. "I should have seen it sooner," he said. "My man's remark," he paused. "I apologize for it." "It is not your apology to make," I said, "but I'll accept it on behalf of Velmore." He nodded. "Treat her well," he said. "Someone like that, you don't find her twice." "I know," I said. "I know that." He left the next morning. The young lord from his party had made a different kind of remark to Wren before departing, had sought her out specifically in her workroom, I was told later, and had apologized to her directly, which she had received with the same steadiness she received everything. She told me about it that evening. "He was very sincere," she said. "Good," I said. "I accepted," she said. "I'm not interested in carrying it." This was, I thought, the most precise expression of her character I had ever heard. She was not interested in carrying things that cost her without purpose. She had put down the weight of invisibility the night she walked toward the doors. She had let the apology be received and released. She moved forward without ballast, and it made her, in her quiet way, one of the freest people I had ever known. She said yes on a morning in early winter, the first real snowfall of the season, the kind that came down straight and soft and left the hold's terraces white and quiet. She came to my council chamber, which was unusual. She had always waited for me to come to her, and I had always come to her because I had understood it as her way of maintaining the balance she needed. But that morning she knocked, and I said come in, and she was standing in the doorway with her coat dusted with snow and her expression resolved. "I've decided," she said. I waited. "Yes," she said, "to the bond, to Velmore, to whatever comes with that." "To me," I said. The corner of her mouth moved. "That remains to be established," she said, "on a daily basis, but yes." "To you." I stood up from behind the council table and crossed the room and stopped in front of her the way I had stopped in front of her on the night of the feast, close enough for the marks to flare, far enough to give her the space she still sometimes needed. "I will earn it," I said, "every day." "I know," she said. And then with the smallest and most precise of gestures, she was a precise woman, she did everything with economy, she reached out and put her hand over the mark on my wrist. The bond flared between us, gold and certain and very warm, and my wolf went still in a way he had not gone still in years. Not the stillness of suppression. The stillness of arrival, the deep quiet of a thing that has been moving toward something for a very long time, and has finally exactly stopped. I covered her hand with mine, very carefully, and we stood in the snowlight of the council chamber's window and said nothing for a long time, because nothing needed to be said. The pact ceremony was held a week later, at Wren's request. She wanted it small, and her request was the one I honored before anyone else's. But there were no small ceremonies in a pact, really, and by the time the hall had assembled for the formal acknowledgement of the bond, it had drawn every wolf in Velmore's reaches, even the outlying ones, even the old wolves who rarely came down from the high quarter. Garrow stood at the front. I noticed this because it was unlike him. He was a man who took his place at the back of things, who had lived long enough to know that the front was for those who needed to be seen, and he did not need to be seen. He stood at the front that night, and he caught my eye and gave me the small nod that old wolves give when they think you have finally done the thing you should have done some time ago. I accepted it. We stood at the head of the hall, Wren and I, in front of the fire trench and the pack and the occasion. She had allowed herself for this one night a dress that was not her workroom clothes, deep green, simply cut, the kind of thing that made no claim beyond its own quality. She did not look like someone trying to be anything other than herself. She looked exactly like herself, lit by firelight, steady and composed and very quietly certain. I took her hand before the pack. Not a dramatic gesture. She would not have wanted drama, and I had learned in the months between the feast and this night the precise calibration of what she wanted and did not want. But I took her hand and turned to face the assembled pack of Velmore and said the words of the formal acknowledgement, that the bond existed, that it was witnessed, that the woman at my side was the fated mate of the Alpha King and would, in the fullness of time and according to her own inclination, stand as Lunar of Velmore if she chose it. That last part I had added myself. The traditional phrasing did not include according to her own inclination. But Wren was not a woman to be installed. She was a woman to be invited, and I wanted the pack to understand the distinction from the beginning. The pack struck their palms against the benches and the walls, the way they had struck them at the feast. But this time the sound was different, fuller, longer, the sound of a pack that had had several weeks to think about what had been said and had arrived at its own conclusions. Garrow's palms struck the front bench with the deliberate force of a man making a point. Around him, the wolves of Velmore made the same point together, until the hall was full of it. Wren stood very still beside me and listened to it. I watched her face. She was working, I could see, to maintain the composure she always maintained, the careful stillness, and it was costing her more than usual in the best possible way. The kind of cost that leaves something behind when it is spent. I leaned down and said quietly, just for her, "They see you." She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "Yes." And I felt her hand, which I was holding, hold mine in return. There is not a great deal more to tell. That is not simply the story of two people learning each other, which is at once the most ordinary thing in the world and the one that takes the longest and matters the most. She became the pack's healer in full, not the overlooked one, but the one people sought out with intention, who was asked for her assessment and given the resources her work required. She sat in council when the matters concerned the pack's health and welfare, and her judgments were not thanked and forgotten. They were recorded and followed. She moved through the hall differently, not because she had changed. She was exactly who she had always been, but because the hall had changed around her. I had a great deal to do with that. I do not take more credit than belongs to me, but I do not deflect it entirely. I paid attention. I made it visible that I paid attention. I did not allow careless remarks to go unremarked, and the pack learned quickly what was and was not acceptable, not because I threatened them, but because I demonstrated what I expected by example. A pack follows its alpha. When the alpha sees someone, they see her too. The bond settled into something neither of us could have predicted from the outside. A steady, practical, very deep partnership, the kind that does not burn so much as sustain. She was the same woman she had always been, precise, capable, quiet at the center, and I was the same man, governed, deliberate, more prone to action than declaration. We were in some ways similar in our silences. We had both spent a long time not requiring anything of anyone, and we had both, in learning each other, started to revise that habit. She told me once, in the dark of early morning when the hold was very quiet, that she had almost not turned around, when I had said her name and she had stopped walking toward the doors. "Almost," I said. "Almost," she agreed. "It was very close." "What made you turn?" She was quiet for a moment in the way she was quiet when she was thinking carefully. "I wasn't sure," she said. "At the time I thought it was curiosity. I didn't know why you would say my name. I had no idea who you thought I was." "And now?" "Now I think," she paused. "I think it was because no one had said it like that before, just my name without anything attached to it. No request and no explanation, just Ren, as though it was enough. I thought about that for a long time, lying in the pre-dawn quiet. Just her name, as though it was enough." "It was," I said. "It has always been enough." She was quiet. Then she found my hand in the dark, the same small, precise gesture she had made in the council chamber, and held it. The mark on my wrist was warm. I had ruled Velmore for 11 years before I learned her name. I have governed it differently in the years since, better, I believe, though I am aware that I am not an objective judge. But there is a version of that governance that she made possible, the one that does not confuse efficiency with attention, that does not mistake a pack smooth, running for evidence that everyone in it is well served, that remembers that the wolves who do not ask for recognition are not necessarily the wolves who do not need it. She did not change me. She was not required to change me. She simply arrived and was steady and waited. Not for me. She had not been waiting for me. She had been waiting for the scope her capabilities deserved. And in waiting she became, without meaning to, the person without whom I could not now imagine the governance of this place or the living of this life. She is Velmore's healer. She is my fated mate. She is the woman the pack spent 3 years looking past, and now cannot imagine looking past. And I think that shift is the truest measure of what she has always been. The morning after the ceremony, I went to her workroom before she had arrived and set a cup of tea, no milk, on the table where she would find it. She walked in 20 minutes later, saw it, looked at me, and said nothing. But she sat down at the table and drank it, and I sat across from her, and the snowlight came through the workroom window and lay across the floor between us, and we were exactly where we were supposed to be, and I knew it all the way down to the bone.